When the sky burned red and the earth shook beneath the march of giants, the people of Blackthorn Keep knew their walls would be tested like never before. Against them stood not just an army, but machines of terror, catapults that hurled death, trebuchets that shattered stone, and a lord who vowed to grind their defiance into dust. Yet inside those crumbling walls, farmers became warriors, children became couriers, and a defiant lord swore that courage would outlast stone. This is the story of fire and faith, of steel against giants, the Siege of Blackthorn. The sun dipped low over the hills, its crimson light striking the stone battlements of Blackthorn Keep. For weeks, the garrison inside had watched the enemy banners appear on the horizon like a growing storm. Farmers had abandoned their fields, villages were burned to the ground, and the once peaceful valley became a war camp. Lord Roderick, master of the keep, stood on the highest tower, gazing at the sea of tents and armored men below. His heart was heavy, for he knew that behind those soldiers were machines, siege engines, designed to break his proud walls. The enemy, led by Duke Alaric, had sworn vengeance after Roderick refused to kneel and surrender his lands. Now, Alaric's army stretched across the valley floor, with carpenters and engineers working day and night. The people of the keep, men and women alike, prepared for the inevitable storm. Barrels of water were hauled up the towers, stones piled high, and cauldrons readied for boiling oil. Children clung to their mothers, whispering fearful prayers that the walls would hold. That evening, the first monstrous shape appeared in the enemy camp. A catapult, its wooden frame dark against the firelight, loomed like a demon summoned from the earth. Soon more followed. Trebuchets, with their long arms and counterweights, taller than any man had ever seen. The sight alone struck terror into the villagers watching from the battlements. These were not weapons of men, they whispered, but of giants. Yet Roderick knew despair would kill faster than stone. He walked among his soldiers that night, placing his hand on their shoulders, speaking words of courage. "The walls of Blackthorn have never fallen," he said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "And they will not fall now. We are not fighting for land alone, but for every soul within these walls. Let them bring their engines. We will answer with fire and steel." As night fell, torches burned on both sides. The valley echoed with the hammering of enemy carpenters and the murmured prayers of defenders. The battle had not yet begun, but already the air was thick with dread. And in the stillness of midnight, a deep creak split the silence. The sound of a trebuchet's arm being tested. It was the herald of the storm to come. The dawn came with the groan of wood and the shriek of air torn apart. The first boulder, hurled from the enemy catapult, struck Blackthorn's curtain wall with a thunderous crack. Dust rained down upon the defenders, and the ground trembled as though the earth itself feared what had been unleashed. Cries rang out as men scrambled for cover, their ears ringing from the impact. The second stone came moments later, smashing into the battlements where young squires had stood only heartbeats before. Their bodies were cast down into the courtyard below, broken like dolls. Mothers screamed, soldiers cursed, and priests raised their voices louder in prayer. The walls of Blackthorn had withstood storms, sieges, and centuries, but against these machines, their endurance was uncertain. Roderick knew the purpose of such attacks. The stones were not only meant to shatter stone, but spirit. Fear was as deadly as steel. He ordered his men to respond with their own engines, smaller mangonels hidden within the towers. The defenders loaded stones and clay pots filled with pitch, setting them alight before launching. Flames streaked the morning sky, crashing into the enemy camp. Shouts rose as tents caught fire, and for a moment, the defenders felt a surge of hope. But hope was fleeting. The enemy trebuchets, their long arms creaking like the bones of titans, began their work. With each swing, massive stones, heavier than oxen, smashed into the walls. The sound was unearthly, a drumbeat of destruction. One tower cracked, sending stones tumbling into the moat. The defenders rushed to brace it with timber, but the damage was spreading. Amid the chaos, The people of the keep clung together. In the chapel, candles flickered as families knelt, whispering prayers for deliverance. In the courtyard, children gathered water from the well, their small hands trembling but determined. Even the women joined the defense, carrying stones to the battlements. Blackthorn was not merely a fortress. It was their home, their last shield against ruin. By nightfall, both sides bore wounds. The enemy had suffered fires and losses, but their siege engines still stood, relentless. Blackthorn's walls were scarred, its defenders bloodied. Yet their will had not broken. Still, in the silence between volleys, one question haunted them all: how long could stone stand against the fury of giants? The third day of the siege dawned beneath a sky choked with smoke. The enemy Trebuchets hurled not only stones now, but pots of pitch and flaming bundles wrapped in tar-soaked cloth. They sailed through the air like fiery comets before crashing upon the wooden hoardings of the walls. Flames erupted along the battlements, sending defenders scrambling with buckets of water. The acrid stench of burning timber filled every breath, and for a moment, it seemed that fire itself would breach the keep faster than stone. Inside the chapel, the bells rang continuously, not for worship, but for warning. Every time the Trebuchets loosed their burdens, the tolling echoed, urging defenders to brace. Priests lifted relics and holy banners, walking among soldiers with chants and blessings, reminding them that they were not alone, that heaven's eyes watched their struggle. For the weary and bloodied, faith became a shield as vital as the stone walls. Lord Roderick refused to let despair claim his men. He ordered countermeasures: barrels of sand dragged to the battlements to smother flames, shields of wet leather hung to protect weak points, and, at night, raids launched beyond the walls to strike at the siege engines. Under cover of darkness, small bands of Blackthorn's bravest crept through the marshes, their faces painted with ash. Twice they reached the engines, setting them aflame before fleeing into the chaos. Though the enemy rebuilt, each act of defiance lit sparks of hope within the keep. But the cost was heavy. Among the raiders was Roderic's own nephew, who did not return from one such foray. His torn body was found at dawn, displayed by Duke Alaric's men on a spear before the camp. The cruelty of the gesture cut deep, stoking fury among the defenders. Mothers wept, soldiers clenched their fists, and Roderick himself stood silent, his face carved in stone. That night, as fires smoldered and the engines groaned in the distance, Roderick gathered his men in the great hall. His voice was steady, though grief laced every word. "They believe their machines will break us," he said, "but stone is not all that holds these walls. Our courage, our unity, our faith, these are stronger than any boulder." His words struck the hearts of the wary, and in that moment, they swore that even if the walls fell, their spirits would not. The siege engines continued their terrible rhythm, but so too did the hearts of Blackthorn beat in defiance. On the seventh day, the sound that every defender dreaded came at last. A thunderous crack louder than thunder, followed by a scream of stone giving way. The largest Trebuchet had hurled a boulder heavier than 3 horses, and it struck the southeast wall where the mortar was weakest. The impact tore through the battlements, collapsing an entire section in a storm of dust and rubble. Screams erupted as men were buried beneath falling stone, and through the haze, the defenders saw what they had feared most, a breach wide enough for an army to pour through. The enemy roared in triumph, drums pounding as they surged toward the gap. Blackthorn's defenders, though shaken, rushed to meet them. Farmers took up spears beside knights, and even boys barely of age grasped slings and hurled stones. It was no longer a siege of walls, but a battle of flesh and steel. The clash at the breach was savage. Blood soaked the rubble as swords clanged, shields shattered, and men fought with desperate fury. Women carried water to the wounded and dragged fallen men from the front. Lord Roderick himself descended into the fray, sword in hand, his armor dented and dust-caked. His presence was like iron, unyielding, and wherever his blade struck, defenders rallied. Yet the enemy was relentless. Duke Alaric's men pressed forward. Wave after wave, their banners snapping in the smoke. Behind them, the siege engines hurled fresh stones, widening the breach. It seemed inevitable that Blackthorn would be overrun. But just as despair neared, Roderic's engineers revealed their secret. A hidden barricade constructed behind the wall, built from timber and braced with iron. As the rubble cleared, attackers found themselves choked in a narrow killing ground, where arrows rained from above and boiling oil poured from murder holes. The tide turned, if only for a moment. The attackers recoiled, dragging their dead, and the defenders sealed the breach with every scrap of timber and stone they could find. Exhaustion hung over the keep, but their defiance had bought them another day. Still, the truth was clear: the walls could not endure forever. Blackthorn was bleeding, and each strike of the siege engines was a heartbeat closer to its fall. The eve of the final assault came with an eerie stillness. The engines had ceased their bombardment, and for the first time in days, silence blanketed the valley. Some whispered that Duke Alaric's men were preparing for the storming of the walls at dawn. Others feared an even darker fate, that tunnels were being dug to collapse the foundations. Inside the keep, the people prepared as though for death. Families huddled together, sharing bread and memories, while soldiers sharpened blades with grim determination. Priests walked among them, offering blessings and last rites. The chapel glowed with candlelight, its walls echoing with hymns of defiance. Even the children, their eyes wide with fear, sang softly, as if to prove that their voices would not be silenced. Lord Roderick moved among them, speaking little, but his presence was a balm. He paused by the chapel door, listening to the song, and felt both pride and sorrow. He knew the dawn might bring their end. Yet he also knew that history would remember how they stood. In the enemy camp, fires burned like stars across the valley. Shadows of soldiers and engines danced in the light, a reminder of the force that would soon come. Scouts reported that scaling ladders and battering rams were being prepared, more engines dragged into position. Duke Alaric intended to finish the siege in one decisive blow. That night, Roderick climbed to the highest tower, standing alone beneath the cold stars. He could see the faint glow of the siege machines, their outlines monstrous against the horizon. Closing his eyes, he whispered a vow. If we fall as lions, not lambs. His heart ached for the lives entrusted to him, but his resolve was iron. When he descended, he found his men gathered, waiting for words. He raised his sword high, its blade catching the firelight. Tomorrow they come, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the keep. Let them. For every stone they have thrown, for every child they have frightened, we will answer with steel and fire. We fight not for victory alone, but for honor, for home, for each other. Let Blackthorn's last night be one of courage. A cheers rose, ragged but fierce. That night few slept. Some prayed, others wept, but all prepared. For when dawn broke, the fate of Blackthorn would be decided. The morning came crimson, as though the sky itself bled for Blackthorn. Horns blared from the enemy camp, and the ground shook beneath the march of thousands. Siege towers rolled forward, their wooden frames looming like giants, while rams swung on chains, ready to smash the gates. The Trebuchets loosed one final barrage, stones thundering into the walls, tearing away what little strength remained. The assault began in full. Ladders crashed against the battlements, soldiers swarming upward only to be cut down by arrows and boiling oil. Rams slammed into the gates, each strike a thunderclap of doom. At the breach, the fighting was hand to hand, a storm of blades and blood. The defenders fought like men possessed, every strike driven by desperation. Lord Roderick was everywhere at once, on the walls, in the breach, at the gates. His sword was a blur, his armor rent and bloodied. Beside him, farmers, priests, and children stood as warriors. They had no choice. Blackthorn was not a fortress now. It was a spirit of defiance made flesh. The enemy pressed harder, their numbers overwhelming. At last the gates splintered beneath the ram, and Alaric's men surged into the courtyard. Chaos erupted, but still the defenders held. Flames consumed the stables, the chapel's bell tolled even as arrows struck it, and through the smoke, the banner of Blackthorn still flew, torn but unbroken. In the heart of the battle, Roderick and Alaric met. Amid the clash of swords and screams, the two lords fought with fury, steel ringing against steel. At last, Roderick struck a blow that sent Alaric to his knees. Yet before he could finish it, a stone from a catapult struck nearby, collapsing the ground beneath them. Both men vanished into the chaos, their fates sealed in the dust. By nightfall, Blackthorn was in ruins. Its walls lay shattered, its towers aflame, but its spirit remained unbowed. Survivors told of how the people fought to the last, how even children lifted stones against armored men. The siege engines had broken stone, but not courage. In the years that followed, bards sang of the Siege of Blackthorn, of fire and stone, of faith and steel. And though the keep itself was gone, its memory stood as a fortress stronger than any wall. A testament that even against giants, the heart of a people could not be crushed. Blackthorn Keep was reduced to ash and ruin, its tower shattered, its gates splintered, and its people scattered. Yet even as the smoke curled into the crimson sky, the spirit of Blackthorn lived on. They had faced the fury of Trebuchets and the cruelty of men, and though their walls had fallen, their courage never did. The enemy could claim stone, but not the memory of defiance carved into history. In the songs of bards, in the whispers of travelers, Blackthorn became more than a fortress. It became a legend. A reminder that even when giants rise, it is not stone, but the unbreakable will of a people that endures forever.